My name is Donna Gockler. I'm the Director of Missoula Parks and Recreation. And we're pretty excited about this process because, to my knowledge, Missoula hasn't had a plan for parks and dealing with growth and development at least since the late 80s, and I'm not sure how long it was before that. This has been a process that we feel is real important in helping the Parks Department staff and the policy and decision makers try to determine how best to go forward and make sure those things that we all love about Missoula are preserved forever, and that all of the urban area looks like it's been cared for from the very beginning, much like the older parts of the city where we have the Greeno parks and the McCormick parks and things like that. We know from a lot of different citizen input meetings and focus groups and surveys that citizens really value, obviously, our topography and the recreation opportunities, and certainly the parks and cultural opportunities, and that's sort of what this is all about. We have let's see, how do I say this? We have a Citizens Advisory Committee. It's about 17 members, and I'd like to ask the citizens that have been part of that committee for the last several months to please stand up. They all have name tags, and I want to thank each and every one of them because they've been attending 4-hour meetings for once a month since last June. And they will be available at the end of the presentation to answer very specific questions that you might have. And so please thank them for representing all of you. We feel it's real important at Parks and Recreation that citizens are heavily involved in all of the processes we do, because that's who parks serve, are the citizens that live here. In addition to the Citizens Advisory Committee, we've conducted a survey that was just completed in mid-October, and we'll show you some of the results of that. And we also have some detailed copies so you can read all of the comments that were made from the survey. You'll have an opportunity to take a real close look at some maps that are in the front of the room that cover everything from including the cornerstones of the open space plan, some of the major corridors from the tram plan, and then more specifically opportunities for parks in the future. We have acquired the help of Jana McKenzie from EDA out of Fort Collins. We went through an extensive and very competitive process to select Jana and her firm and feel real good about that. And I'm going to turn this over to Jana in just a moment. I want to remind everybody this will be presented in MCAT in the future, so you'll have an opportunity to watch it on TV. We asked that if you could hold questions until the end, and that's why we wanted to make sure that everybody had an evaluation form and a pencil so you wouldn't forget your question, because they're all important to us. And so if you just jot that down, we'll get through the questions and answers and can go back and forth through the PowerPoint presentation or go directly to maps at the conclusion of the presentation. The other thing we'd like you to do before you leave is fill out that comment form. You can provide any comments you like. Everything is open. We made a few statements there to kind of hopefully generate some thoughts and ideas from you. The other thing that you'll have an opportunity to look at is some real detailed lists of the park inventory, levels of service that we're considering recommending. And when I say we, I'm always referring to city and county staff, city and county park boards, and also the Citizens Advisory Committee. So it's gone through and is going through quite an extensive process, and you'll see that as we go through the PowerPoint presentation. With that, Jana, I think I'll turn it over to you and let you get started.
Thank you. And if you guys haven't signed in, please do so. We like to keep a record of how all the good work that the citizens are doing to contribute to the plan. So please let your name go into the record. Also, we have other ways you can comment. We have little sticky pads. So if you want to mark things on the maps later, or a lot of people don't feel comfortable writing on maps. That's okay. Put your note on here and stick it up on the maps. And if you have any other comments, so you can do it that way as well. Don't want to forget a local liaison that we have here, Jenny Miner-Schnagen with Rockingham Design has helped us on this plan as well. So we feel real fortunate we have a good team here. I'm going to go through this presentation, and it does take 35 to 40 minutes to go through this. And I think it's pretty important. There's a lot of detail in here, and if you don't understand something, I'll try to put it in layman's terms, because a lot of people don't understand the jargon, and I get into that sometimes. So if you don't understand something, you know, wave your hand and say, wait, what does that mean? And I can explain that a little bit. But I'd like to reserve some of the questions for later, just in the interest of getting through this, if that's okay with you guys. What we've done is come up with a draft plan at this point. It's not written yet. We'll get to that point, and that'll come out in about a month and a half, is the actual written document. But this is a joint county and city planning process within the urban area of Missoula, which is defined by the annexed incorporated boundaries plus 3 miles around the edge of it. So it's a pretty large study area. The purpose of it is to identify what the community needs are in the Missoula area in terms of parks and recreation and trails and open space and everything. And then to define the types of parks and recreational facilities that make up that system. So what are the components, the ingredients in the recipe, so to speak, that you put together to create this system? Identify important resources so that we know when we locate something, why we're locating it where we are, and why we're avoiding other areas that may be sensitive. To identify conceptual locations and connections for parks, recreation resources. And it's conceptual. A lot of these things you'll see later are, you have to remember that. They aren't meant to target or be specific, except where the public land already exists. They're meant to say there's an area here where we want to do something. Then one of the most important things that can happen out of this planning process is to set goals and policies that sort of set the framework for decision making, because no matter how good we think we are as consultants, as a group, and we think we have our crystal ball on where the future lies, it'll change. And there'll be things that need to be flexible in this plan. And that flexibility is built in through goals and policies, and then the design criteria and locational criteria for these elements, so that if situations change, you have the ability to adapt the plan. And then priority projects that come out of this, some sense of magnitude of scale for costs. What are we getting ourselves into? And then what are some of the tools to actually implement this plan? There's been a lot of planning that's gone on over the years. It's a great list. 25 years ago, one of the first parks, recreation, open space plans was done. And then since then, there's been other updates to that. One of the most significant ones here that you guys have been working a lot on is this open space plan that identified the cornerstone areas and set up some parameters for how you provide parks and conservation areas. And there's been other things that have been happening in other arenas, like the non-motorized transportation plan that deals with trails connections. There's a new plan with the growth policy that sets a lot of different policy standards on how you provide things in the communities, one component of which is parks and recreation. There's aquatic feasibility study that sort of ended up with some of the recommendations that just got voted on and approved in terms of a new aquatic facility at McCormick Park. And there's other ongoing things with neighborhood plans and subdivision regulations and the like. So we're not starting from scratch. We're building upon a lot of the things that have already been done. The way that the schedule works, we started way back here in the summer, and we've been working hard on getting the inventory together. Sounds like an easy task. There are literally more than 150 different properties that are owned between the city and the county. And to actually compile those into some sort of computer database that is coherent and usable and has the right attributes to it is quite a challenge. And the city and county and we have been working to put that database together. It's not perfect yet, and I'm sure even after the plan's done, we'll find some tweaking that needs to be done, but it's been a pretty monumental task. It will serve as a wonderful tool in the future for tracking what happens, and things should be able to be added to it pretty easily after this has been created now. We've done a needs assessment. I'll get into that in a little more detail. Visions, goals, and policies. And then we have right now this parks plan, and here we are at this point in the check-in where we're saying, okay, it's time to check in with everybody, and are we headed in the right direction before we actually produce this draft plan that will go through an adoption process, and in February hopefully get adopted by the various agencies, by both the city and the county. A lot of people don't understand planning processes and think, okay, well, we ought to be able to just jump to the end. We know what we need to do. But in a way, a lot of you probably are right, but it helps to check in, and you have to know what the basis of your decision making really is based on what you have, what people think they need, where you think you want to go, develop the policies that as a governmental agency you need to make decisions, and then come up with your project's costs and implementation strategies from that. And the whole process is actually pretty important to document. And I'm going to go through that a little bit with you because it helps rationalize and justify the decision making we've been doing so far. One of the first things we need to look at, and the maps on the walls when you go look at this, we'll be able to look at this in more detail. See these brownish, tannish areas here? Those are existing and proposed residential areas, as listed in comprehensive plans or other neighborhood plans that have been done to date, as well as mapped off of aerial photography, the limits of which are defined by those parcels that are 1 acre lots or smaller, so it's urban level development. The 2020 transportation plan identified this direction out this way with another 3,900 new units in the next 15, 17 years. And that translates into another 10,000, 12,000 people. So that's just in that area alone, as well as some other development that will be occurring in this area and here. So that currently, the latest population statistics we have was from the 2000 census. So there's approximately 80,000 in that greater Missoula area. And it'll probably grow to 127,000 in that time frame. So that's a pretty significant growth curve. And that sort of just illustrates the need to get the act together, get the vision together, get a plan together on how do you create a parks and recreation structure that will withstand the test of time, that will be as valid 50 years from now as it is today. So that's really what the vision for this, even though it's a 15-year plan. To do that, we need to define, like I said, the components of this. What's the elements of the recipe that fit in there? The backbone of this system really is a neighborhood park system. That's the ones that people touch and feel on a daily basis. You drive by them, you go to them, you meet with neighbors in those kinds of parks. We define them as the parks that are of substantial enough size that you can do various things in them. And I'll come back to pocket parks in a second. They're the little smaller version of neighborhood parks. But neighborhood parks, we have set a standard of 2.5 acres per 1,000 population. So if you had 3,000 people in an area, you'd need 7.5 acres park. And so it's related to population and density. And that the preferable size is 5 to 12 acres. Sort of puts you in the category of being able to put in some multi-purpose play area, a place to throw the frisbee, or to have just some open multi-purpose space, perhaps do some youth sports practice in those fields, and so on. And they ought to be within a walkable distance, 10-minute, 15-minute walk, a half-mile service radius. So if you were to draw grids in the city, you would say that there would be one of these larger neighborhood parks per square mile, something like a Bonner Park or some of the others, Bess Reed and some of those others. Pocket parks are sort of a diminutive version of those parks. And the way Missoula area has a lot of those, a lot of smaller parks, but it doesn't have as many of the larger neighborhood parks. They're about a quarter-mile service radius, so they're a little quicker to get to, and are generally less than 2 acres inside. And so you wouldn't have as many things in those. They may just little patches of land, maybe a picnic shelter, maybe some a playground or some other things. Community parks are the larger parks. That's where you put more of your active recreation, but you may also have larger areas of natural in them. Greeno Park is one example of that. Has very little programmed activity in it or active recreation, as opposed to Playfair, which is a very active park. So they're larger parks. They are located between 1 and 2 miles of the residents that are in the vicinity, so you have a distribution. a desirable distribution of about 1 every 4 to 6 square miles or something like that, or think of them about 3 miles apart, and that and well connected with trail systems. Regional parks, Fort Missoula fits into that category really well. It's sort of a multi-agency effort. A lot of things come together. It's larger often than what a city itself could do, and it has larger regional draws. Visual green space is a part. That has to do with the aesthetics of the community. To say that we have places that really we want to show and put on flower shows, or we have boulevards or other kinds of things that are important to the aesthetics of the community. And then conservations. Clearly, that's what your open space plan in 1995 is really focused on, and you've done a really admirable job of doing things like Mount Sentinel and Mount Jumbo and North Hills and those kinds of things. The key thing with conservation areas is that natural resource is the priority there. It sort of shifts from the urban parks, where people are the priority, to the conservation areas, which is preserved for natural resource values. And so therefore the balance of use between natural resource and public use is a really critical thing. The other parts are trails and connections, paved and off-street trails, paved and unpaved off-street trails, as well as sort of the on-street connectors, bike lanes, bike routes that connect people and get people out of their vehicles and other modes of transportation to these various destinations. And then there's common areas. This is all sort of part of the subdivision development process that by state statute you have a certain percentage of land that is mandated to be dedicated as public parkland. And many of them are sort of common areas in private ownership, so they may serve as buffer areas between back of lots or steep hillsides and things like that. But through the years, the city and the county has gotten numerous parcels in public ownership that are in these common areas that really don't fit any of the standards we just talked about. They're either not needed because there's other parks already in the neighborhood, and they're sort of ancillary pieces of property that exist. And they have become sort of a bone of contention with some people, and I think Donna today was saying some people refer to them as, weed lots or something like that, because the Parks Department, in all honesty, has trouble maintaining all of these different lands because of budgetary and other reasons. So one of the questions is, and it's on one of your forms, what should the city or county do with lands that don't meet the standards? Is it okay to have them the way they are? Are there other disposition opportunities for those? What do you think about that? We would like to have some of your opinions on that. Now this is a picture of the whole plan area, and again, here's that 3-mile boundary with a little extension out here in the Wymollen area where the sewer service lends itself to urban level development. And so we have looked at, and I'm zooming in a little bit here, to say that we now have this map that has mapped all of these little parcels and parks, and there's a bunch of them on here. And that was really an important part, is mapping all those, as well as the conservation areas and the trails that exist and public lands like the University of Montana, as well as the forest properties, conservation easements, common areas, just a numerous host. And you guys are quite blessed with the amount of public lands that you have sort of surrounding the community. But just mapping them is one thing, but understanding what that means to the community is another. This is a map. This is the community park service area. Remember how I talked about the 1.5 mile service radius, and you see this blue area around it. If you map that, it says, okay, what areas of the urban level development, either existing or planned, are served by those existing parks from a geographical distribution standpoint. And what you see is that there's areas that are planned to be developed out here that are further away than we would like from community park services. And when you look at it from a neighborhood standpoint and you apply around neighborhood parks and pocket parks the half-mile or quarter-mile boundary, that's what this brighter yellow is. And you'll see, oops, I should probably zoom in on that a little bit, that clearly there are pieces of even the existing community that aren't very well served by some neighborhood parks or pocket parks in here. And clearly out in the developing areas, parks need to be provided for those as those areas develop. Now, one thing I should say about that, that does not solve the problem of how big that park is. You know, and the neighborhood park in some of these areas, which are becoming more dense over time, may need to have additional ways to meet those park needs. Because remember the standard where I said if there's 3,000 people in a square mile and you need 7.5 acres of parkland, they may only have 3. You might be looking for other ways to add and infill in existing development areas. So in addition to what Missoula is doing, we like to look outside a little bit and say, what are some peer communities or other communities doing? How do we benchmark ourselves against that? Some people come and go from Missoula and may have expectations when they come here, or if you're trying to attract a certain level of development, you might say, how well are we doing? And we've looked at 10 different communities that were gracious enough to fill out our little survey forms and say, can you take time out of your busy staff day to fill out all this data about your community? And what we did was have compared parkland standards, what we just talked about, and level of service like acres per thousand, and also specifically the level of service for recreational facilities, mostly the big space takers, like ball fields and soccer fields and things like that. But as well as some other things. And it provides sort of a benchmark. Oh. What we found is that on the neighborhood parkland level, we did the data by 2 different ways, the city and the larger area, because we have different population bases between the two. If you look at what the existing urban area, most urban areas are, your level of service currently is about 2.5 acres per thousand, which is interestingly right where we've targeted so far with neighborhood parks as well. The average of other communities is about 2. However, a lot of those other communities are struggling to implement parks too. So when you look at the data a little finer, you might take off the top tier of the community and say, we really want to be like those guys, and we like their park system. And they're closer to 2.5 to 3 acres per thousand is what they're providing. Community parkland is sort of the same thing. You're a little higher than your other communities in that you're doing a pretty good job between having Fort Missoula, which we did count some of the acreage towards community parkland in there. It functions a lot like a community park. The average of the other communities is more down in the 3-acre category. So you're doing pretty well. There's some people who had a lot of forethought to put aside large pieces of land in your community that have situated you pretty well so far. But it won't last long. You know, if there's more people that come, you're going to need to look for where's the next community park go? What do you do next for other people who come so they can enjoy the same kind of standard that currently exists in the community? The golf thing, I think that's very interesting, and I've observed it in my own community, is that a lot of the teens and young adults are doing that where it wasn't in my generation. So there must be some trend and phenomenon happening there. Soccer, walking, hiking, recreational swimming. That's really interesting. General playground use, ice hockey, baseball, mountain biking, fishing, and so on. Now, that sort of translates, okay, so you do all these things, but maybe you don't do them because it's not available, right? So what do you think there's not enough of? Indoor swimming pools, number 1. And that's interesting because, you know, kids are involved with swimming, but they're saying probably that we could do it longer and harder and more and if we had a year-round facility. Teen recreation centers came out 2nd. Outdoor swimming and wading pools 3rd. Skate parks 4th. Dog-specific areas by 40%. Sculpture, public artworks 40%. Exercise equipment 39%. Outdoor facilities for performances and festivals at 36%. Arts and crafts at 36%. So there's all sorts of things, wildlife, natural information stations, natural areas, inline hockey rinks, indoor recreation facilities, and so on. Now, I think what you have to say is that there's nothing, except for these 2 up here, and arguably that one outdoor, these 2 that would be supported by the majority of the population. But then how many of us all do the same things? So I think anytime you get up into the, a third to close to half of the population that's saying something about there's not enough of, that's pretty significant, because not all of us do all those things. So another way to look at that is to say, who knows what they're talking about, right? I mean, or who participates in these activities. So for those who know about teen recreation issues, and for those who have an opinion, because there were many people who said, I don't have an opinion about that. So for those who had an opinion, teen recreation centers came out really high. And one of the others that really shifted places in priorities, arts and crafts facilities, and inline hockey rinks, and senior recreation centers. Because if you have a younger population, they aren't necessarily going to know if seniors need recreation centers or not, right? So this is a way of saying what elements out here have constituent groups who have strongly held opinions about there's not enough of this thing. And I think those are important also, as well as majority opinions. So there's the survey. There's a lot of detail in there. It's pretty interesting stuff if you want to get into it in more detail. It's also on the city's website. We contacted, and Jenny contacted all these user groups in town, and those are different recreation providers or interest groups, and asked them about the system. And I won't go into this in detail, but we asked for participation levels and opinions about facilities. Most groups are pretty happy, but poor maintenance of facilities was probably one of the most frequently listed things, and restrooms came up again, as well as some of the sports organizations, inadequate field sizes, or compacted turf, and some of those kinds of things. But by and large, everybody's pretty happy. I mean, and most activities are relatively constant in terms of participation. There's not huge waiting lists on all things. Hockey has some issues, but some of that's coming up with some of the new things that are happening at the fairgrounds and that project. Now I'm going to transition a little bit into goals and policies. There's a lot of words on this, but what I want to say is that we have basically 6, and today we came up with a 7th with the Citizen Advisory Committee that's not in here yet. But the goals really have to do with setting the framework of what you want to achieve with the system. And it's important to build this structure from the foundation up. The goals are the very foundation, and then the policies will be what you build on top of that until you get to the finial on the top, which may be the regulations that you actually enact, or the other development kinds of things you might do. But to provide a wide range of recreational and leisure time opportunities, and to equitably distribute parks. Some of these sound like you ought to know that, but if we don't write them down, people forget that equal distribution is an important thing. That we want to provide things that have neighborhood and even more importantly, community-wide significance. So focus on the community benefits when you're choosing what kinds of things to provide. We want to maintain them at a high level of quality. We want to protect and enhance the natural outdoor environment and be environmentally sensitive in what we do. And we want to have adequate acquisition tools and funding sources to make sure that this can be realized. Now that sets it up for all sorts of different specific items underneath there. Again, there's another document if you want to go into some of the details on some of the policy recommendations that are coming out of that. The 7th one we added today was there ought to be a mechanism by which you update and revisit what we did today, and through this planning process. Our crystal ball, 5 years from now, there may need to be adjustments. So it has to do with an ongoing sort of maintenance of the plan that's added as another goal. Now, let's get to the specific recommendations. Now, you guys kind of understand the policy basis and how we've gotten here so far. What does it really mean? When we look at the urban area, this LOS means level of service. So that's just sort of acronym for, LOS is just for how are we doing in providing parkland. Currently, there's 1.84 acres per 1,000 population. And so you could say that if in the urban area, there's about 7 to 9 parks that could be developed, and that would meet the 2.5 acres per 1,000 standard that we're proposing. A lot of those lands currently exist in undeveloped parkland. Some of them don't. and it doesn't solve all the distribution issues in existing developed areas. But that's sort of the magnitude of the scale. When you go to the 2020 vision, when there's 127,000 people in this urban area, then the total may be 20 to 25 parks. That's 1.5 neighborhood parks per year. 1 to 1.5 neighborhood parks per year that you're bringing online. So you know, need to be ready. If that's what you're doing now, is you're going to maintain the existing level of service that you have in your existing community, and you're transferring that to new development areas, you're going to need 20 to 25 new neighborhood parks. Now, on the community park level, right now you're doing pretty good. You're only a little bit behind of the, if you apply to the whole urban area population of one park maybe you need, and from the community park standpoint. One good project to satisfy that need would be the Fort Missoula development that's been anticipated. There's a master plan done for that. That would be a great way to meet that need. And again, this was 2,000 population. Already by, you know, in another month or so, we'll be into 2004. And I don't know what those population statistics are. So, you know, our recommendation would be to get going on that plan and see how you can get that done. And then look at ways in the future you can maybe come up with a total of 3 more parks, or in that time frame. Now we have a master plan. This again is the sort of the view of the whole area. But if you zoom in just a little closer, and these maps are on the wall, and please come up after this and go look at these in detail. The community parks we've identified. Well, here's Fort Missoula. That's a plan. You ought to do that one. McCormick Park has a plan for it. That ought to be done to upgrade all that. And then there's some other various parks. This is a planned park up here with some soccer fields and other things. But there's other community parks to consider. One out here, this one's very conceptually located. We stuck this on the map. That could move anywhere over in here. The idea is that there's something that needs to address the growth that's going out in that direction. This one up here is somewhat opportunistic. There's existing school lands up there that the school district says that they have no future use for. And they would be willing to partner on some kind of park facility up in that area. That could be a community park. I don't know what that means yet, but, and then there's other sort of public park lands that are city, county owned down in this area, as well as some school properties in between. So there's some opportunities that with existing lands also that ought to look at how you could expand some of your community level of service. In addition to that, we have neighborhood parks. Now, remember how I said 20 to 25? I think we have 27 shown on this. That's a detail of you know, the discrepancy is really insignificant there. The point is that if you have urban level development happening and you need parks, then that's about the density of the distribution that's going to need to happen. And some of them are actually, and then there's also recommendations for serving existing neighborhoods better, where they're underserved in here. Ways to capitalize maybe on the Willard School site, cross connections across the railroad, other things that are existing park sites that could be developed, so on and so forth. This park right here is an existing county, I think that's the one. That one's an existing county park that could be developed. So there's all sorts of ways that you can skin this cat, but it's that's sort of the magnitude. Now, so here's in summary. I've kind of gone over this already. Somewhere in the range of 25 neighborhood parks that are all these different strategies to do that. Community parks, we've talked about that. Recreation facilities, that was off of this survey that says we want to have these kind of facilities in the future, and they may end up in your community parks or part of, some of these are already going to be taken care of. And then don't forget the trail connections, either the primary off-street trail system, that's your main spine trails, but other secondary connections to get people easily to and from. And make sure that your scorecard as I have easy access to my neighborhood park continues to stay at that level. Conservation lands, again, continue to promote the protection of those open space areas, and as well as other unique natural environments that might have community-wide significance. Now, some of the tools that you ought to think about, and this is sort of what happens after this plan, how the city and the county chooses to implement it is sort of a second process after this. This plan, we're not going to come up and say this is exactly how you have to implement it. That's going to be a longer discussion, probably on what tools it takes and how do you finance it, just like your bond issue for the aquatic center, it took a while to manifest itself and so on. What happens currently is you've got a general fund, city-county budget, property tax. One of the things we think ought to be looked at is updating the subdivision ordinance. Development fees is one way. I mean, if you were to draw a line around the city right now, you guys have already said through your surveys, you think you're doing pretty well and you're pretty well satisfied. So if you have new development, you need parks for new people. And so one of the ways that most communities that I know and have worked with in the past, they're favored, the methods that they can generate enough revenues to do what they need to do is through development fees and sales taxes. That's how they frankly do it. Because it's one of the ways they can get enough money to do what they need to do. And as well, it sort of puts the, how would I say that if you have new residents coming in, then the new residents ought to be somewhat responsible for providing the services that they need. So that's sort of the justification for those. Local sales tax, there's things to look at that way that would fund specific projects, lodging taxes, bond elections. You guys are doing this really pretty successfully, and a lot of the things that have happened in the communities have to do with this particular mechanism. And lastly, some sort of separate Parks and Recreation district. It could be a special district for maintenance. It could be an overall district that sort of separates Parks and Recreation from the whole city-county thing. Other communities have done that. They draw a line around an area and say, we're going to have a special district just for Parks and Recreation, and we're going to set up a separate property tax base just for that. So those are things to consider. There's sort of a menu of options. Some may work, some may not for Missoula, and that's going to be sort of up to the city leaders and county leaders to decide. In terms of where we go from here, we still have some more work with the committee. We're going to go city and county park boards. We've already been in front of most of these groups, planning board, the city council, and the commissioners, and we've had work sessions with them over the last couple of days here. So, and eventually it'll be adopted as one of the official documents that guides how the city and county operate in the future. So with that, anything I forgot, Donna?
No, thanks, Jana. I think what we'd like to do is if there's any questions for the entire group, perhaps we could have you come up to a microphone over there and ask. We'll spend about 5 minutes doing that, and then what I'd like to do is we'll turn on the lights and let you visit with the Citizens Advisory Committee members. They have detailed lists of all of the items that Jana covered. If you want to look in detail at maps, sizes of parks, how level of service was determined, they'll be able to help you with those questions, and both Jana and I will be available. If you haven't signed in yet, we'd like you to do that before you leave, and please fill out a survey form for us. We'll be documenting all of your comments, and they will also become part of this overall planning process. And in case I don't get to say it before you leave or get to visit with each one of you individually, once again, I want to really thank you for your commitment to parks and your interest in giving us your opinion on these issues.